All right. I guess, is all council here? Oh, sorry, David. Go ahead. All right, this is the Cortez City Council work session. Today is Tuesday, May 9th, 2023, and the time is 5:45 p.m. We'll call this work session to order, and we'll start with A on our agenda, a housing needs assessment update. All right, and make sure your mic is green. Perfect.
Good evening. I'm Willa Williford, and I have served as the primary point of contact for the Housing Needs Assessment team, and I am excited to share the summary and findings with you this evening. I believe that the full report was also provided to you, and we can reference any details in that if you have specific questions. But my intent is to share 20 to 30 minutes of content and then support a discussion around the findings and answer any questions that you may have. So we started this work back in November. The work was guided by a really strong process committee with a lot of representation from people within the community with different professional expertise and points of view that really helped to inform and ground our work, and they provided feedback on our early drafts and as well as direction around employer interviews and many of the different kinds of outreach we should do. The intent with this is that it sets the stage for your policy making, but also can be informative to others in the community that are doing housing work both in the private and the public sector. The methodology includes, we did an extensive set of interviews with employers and other local stakeholders, property managers, realtors, developers, and particularly folks who use the code, because part of our scope of work was a scan of the code and recommendations around how that might be improved to facilitate housing specifically. We also pulled in a sort of a layered stack of resources around MLS data, what's available in the rental market, what's available in the census data, and work together to knit those together into the story that is the needs assessment. So in terms of just a baseline about how do we define affordable? In my line of work, we refer to something as affordable when you pay 30% of your income on your housing. So if your income is very high, the housing that's affordable to you can also be priced pretty high. If your income is very low, there's not very much that you can afford. So we provide this sort of crosswalk, and we use this very consistently throughout the needs assessment around what are household incomes, how does that relate to the area median income, which is sort of a shortcut mechanism we use a lot in the housing world around funding sources, but it's also referenced in your code around some of the incentives you provide. So we intentionally created the tiers here so that they align with the incentives in the current code documents. The other thing so then, if you sort of take, okay, a household makes this range of income, that aligns with, this portion of the area median income, therefore you can afford this rent or this sale price. In terms of the sale prices, we do build in sort of current assumptions around interest rates and down payments and so forth. So we can get into more of those details if that's of interest. But the other thing to, I think, highlight is that when we talk about housing in a community and affordable housing, we are not talking about just subsidized housing. We are talking about the entire continuum of housing but our focus here is your workforce. So across your workforce, there's many different needs in terms of price points, types of housing, where people are at. And so this assessment is intended to be comprehensive. It doesn't address things like second home ownership or retirees, which may be putting some pressures on your market as well and may create some needs that are not described in this document. So does that just make sense in terms of sort of baseline definition and how we're getting going? Excellent. So we build the needs assessment from the local demographics and the local job employment and economy. So I'll just do a baseline of one slide on each of those. With a population of about 9,000 people, you're a third of Montezuma County. You've been seeing a lot of population growth, and spoiler alert, the housing supply hasn't kept up with that. With a median age of about 38, that's, it feels on the younger side. We had some comments about, but we also have a strong senior population. It may be influenced by how many young children you have. And you do have a really good cohort of working age, prime working age is, I think the demographers call it, of 25 to 54. Your average household size is 2.4, so that comes into play when we start to build how many housing units are needed compared to jobs. And we are noticing that renter households, the largest cohort of renter households is one bedroom, or one person, sorry, and the largest cohort of owner households is two people. So some larger families pull the overall average up, but there's a lot of smaller households. And then, this is an important indicator, especially over time and especially with the pressures you're seeing in your market, that many of your residents are cost burdened, and this is particularly impacting renters. And we use the term cost burden when you're paying more than 30% of your income on your housing, and that's starting to erode your ability to pay for your other basic life necessities. So, in the employment space.
Can I ask
yes.
a question about demographics quick?
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is something you can answer, but I saw, so kind of our workforce, that 25 to 54 makes up a third of our population. Is there, what's a strong, is there a percentage that makes a strong community, when like 50% of your population is the workforce, or?
Yeah, we don't have a judgment call on that.
Okay.
Yeah. But we often look at how the cohorts are changing, like is your population shifting into more retirees and so forth. Yeah.
Did you just look at full-time year-round residents, or did you look at other folks that might be living somewhere else in the winter, for example?
Yeah, so this is full-time, is year-round residents driven by census data. So if they're responding to the census elsewhere, they wouldn't be counted.
Thank you.
Yeah. So in terms of in terms of employment, our needs assessment is looking at current conditions and projecting out 5 years. So we have a projection of 620 new jobs. This is taking demographer data and tempering it a little bit. We felt that it was over optimistic, but we used some other factors to adjust it downward a bit. There's also a dynamic right now that will not come as a surprise to you, that there's quite a number of jobs that are unfilled, 7.5%. So employers repeated again and again, we've been trying to hire, we've been really, where we used to have a plethora of good candidates, now we're lucky if we have one or two. And many jobs are unfilled. So that definitely plays into how we build our current conditions housing need. There's also, there's definitely some fluctuation in your jobs with your summer peak. So not all of those jobs are year-round. We were measuring jobs, though, in a lower time of the year, January and February. And then the other thing is just what's the composition of the industries, and your largest industries aren't super well paid. So those top 5 categories are just listed there, and you see that it's not till you get down to public administration that the salaries start to really, or the wages start to really increase. So just keeping in mind that we need a lot of employees in this sort of, these retail, trade, accommodation, food service, education, et cetera, that have, good wages but not great.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Sorry. Whenever you're projecting the jobs in the next 5 years, what is it? Do you have any idea what types of jobs, or are you assuming they would be the similar jobs that we have now?
We have assumed a similar job mix, and I think that obviously you have a lot of economic development work going on that could change the course of that, and that could be really positive.
Okay, thank you.
So this, these things start to paint the picture, or I would say that the summary big picture trends in your report are rising prices and limited inventory, and the challenges that employers are having around recruitment and retention. And so those very quickly lead us into, our housing, what are our needs and our gaps in the housing space. So as we start, we then look at housing inventory, what is the state of the market, and start to layer that together with the demographics. So you have a very high occupancy rate. This is positive around you're using your housing inventory efficiently with people living in the homes. Some mountain communities that I work in have as low as like a 33% occupancy because they have so many second homeowners. What is challenging is that there isn't necessarily inventory for people to rent and buy and move around. So that's kind of a double-edged sword there. Historically, you've had about 60% ownership. With the tools that are currently available, building rentals is tending to be easier in Colorado. Not that anything in the housing world is totally easy. But then another thing we just want to highlight is your inventory is old. There's a lot of need to reinvest in the housing that is here, just because so much of it was built more than 50 years ago. Single-family homes are by far the dominant type of housing, with mobile homes being second. I want to highlight these two charts that we're showing just to show a little bit of that if we're just thinking about what is basic housing that people need for the size of their household, we have a bit of a misalignment of more larger homes, kind of 3 bedrooms, where we have more households that are 1 and 2 people. It's wonderful to live in a 3-bedroom as a 1 or 2 person household if you need extra space or an office or what have you, but it's also sort of a luxury if we're just thinking about responding to the need. So drilling into the for sale market specifically, probably not a surprise to you all in this room, but the housing prices in the past couple of years have been increasing much more rapidly than wages. I mean, 16% a year is an enormous rate of increase. And so, we still look affordable relative to other parts of Colorado potentially, but with housing prices, around $300,000, that is out of reach for a lot of people. So I'm not sure how well you can see this chart, but in your report, it may be helpful reference because we're showing sort of distribution of how many households make different amounts of income and how many homes are listed available to those folks. And really what we're demonstrating is that without a 6-figure household income, you really don't have any choices in this market. Any questions on that? Moving on to the rental market and a similar analysis. So rents have been increasing rapidly as well. The vacancy is so low. I mean, that's driving up the ability for landlords to be very particular about who they rent to and have, and renters having very, very limited choices when they need to change their housing for whatever reason. The other thing that this puts a tremendous strain on is the ability of new employees to move to the area, find housing, and accept a job. Then we observe that there are very few rental listings. Most or almost half of renters need a unit that's under $800 a month to be affordable. And there were 7 listings in the 3 months that we tracked it. So just very hard to get that. Another indicator in the rental market space is that the housing authority's wait list is 300 people on it. So people are really thinking, how can can I access some sort of help? So then as we shift from sort of what's the state of the market into what are the current and projected housing needs, we look at the catch-up need. We really build that number on 2 things. What are the unfilled jobs, and what are the housing units that are planned and they're a sure enough thing that we can say they're going to help absorb some of this demand. So the Pinion project was the only project we used to sort of adjust this catch-up need with the 59 units. And you're seeing a range here, which I'll talk about a little more on the next slide, but so we take our catch-up needs and we look at okay, now we're looking out 5 years, how are we gonna keep up with our housing need? And that looks at the job growth and what's gonna happen as people are retiring and employers are needing to replace those positions that are being vacated. And in many cases, what we heard from most employers is when people retire, they stay in this community. It's a great place to continue to live, and their community is here, and there's a lot of good reasons to stay. If they do retire somewhere else, it's unlikely that the person coming to fill their job can afford the house they would be vacating. So that's why retirement becomes a really important dynamic in the keep up, especially as some of your employers are looking at significant numbers of employees retiring. So then we add those two things together and we give you a range, and I acknowledge this is a very big range. So the why of this big range, and this kind of gives you more detail on those sort of how we break out those specific numbers of the catch up and keep up. But we looked at this two ways. We looked at you could maintain your current commuting patterns and grow based on where people live, which would mean that fewer residential units are needed in Cortez because you're a job center, or you could try to increase the housing within Cortez so that more people lived closer to their work and reduce that commuting shed dynamic. This is a policy decision and also how the market responds to the various things that you put in place. So but together, the truth probably lies somewhere in between these two numbers. And that's the explanation around why this is such a broad range. So why don't I go back and just ask if there's questions on the big picture need projection.
Yeah, I guess I have a question around some of the surrounding communities. I know this is a Cortez study, but in Mancos and Dolores in particular, and just the county in terms of, affordability. And again, I know this is a Cortez study, but do you assume that they're facing a similar situation in Montezuma County? So the reason I ask that is just that, where would people come from to Cortez to go to work, for example? Like, that would be less expensive than Cortez.
Absolutely. I think it's a great point. Housing never respects municipal boundaries. And we were pretty purely focused on the city of Cortez. That was our scope. But we did refer to and take into consideration the Region 9 study that was conducted, I think it was a year or two ago, by Root Policy, because that is much more comprehensive around that. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Just in your experience, have you come across other cities in the state of Colorado or elsewhere that kind of have similar numbers and issues as Cortez?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it is it's a statewide problem, and I've been consulting for 7 years, and I would say that in the past 3 or 4 years, communities that had never considered housing to be a problem are now doing so. So, I did a needs assessment for Alamosa. I did one for the city of Craig, and they do have similar issues around. And I think the next section that we're going to get into around cost of construction, that's one of the dynamics that's sort of pushing us all in, population growth, job growth. There are things that are really positive, but then there's also dynamics that are making it really hard to meet the challenge. So, in terms of, let's talk about cost of construction. So, with the advisory team and our developer interviews, we built this very generic, but I think well-informed assumptions around if you were going to go build a small single-family home right now, what would it cost? And the outcome there, and we can scrutinize the assumptions. They're well informed, but they are just assumptions. But the outcome there is that we're just under $300 a square foot. This is actually pretty affordable relative to some of your peers, but that results in a home that costs about $352,000, and that is out of reach for most of the core workforce and residents here. So this is a very fundamental sort of data point around why the market isn't responding to this problem adequately. So when we take that number and we kind of circle it back to where we started with, okay, if you make a certain income, you can afford, these various different home prices. And so you need a six-figure income to afford this home. If we look at, a household that's just making, $55,000 a year, which is, well deep in the bell curve of a lot of your industries, a really significant subsidy would be needed to make that project happen, or to be profitable. So the other thing is, so there's sort of this cost of construction problem. There's also just the rate of production. So you had a strong rate of production like in the 70s and the 80s, and you built a lot of inventory in Cortez. And since the Great Recession, that production rate has stayed pretty slow. And so that is, I think our best data was that we're pulling about 22 permits each year, and using that range that we gave you, if you were to catch up and keep up, you'd need to be doing, 2, 3, 4x that. Apologies for being the bearer of bad news in that respect, but that is the finding. So I think, then that quickly leads us to, well, where's the city's role in supporting, addressing, around solutions? And the land use regulatory scan does set you up to then use the data of this report in directing the policy work going forward. And there's a number of pretty detailed recommendations within the report that we just summarized here at a high level around, updating the comp plan, trying to add flexibility and clarity to the code just to reduce uncertainty and risk, coordinating with the county more strategically, so not everything needs to be necessarily referred, but certain types of projects and coordination around. A lot of times, I'm just going to make a generalization that cities are kind of more organized in their regulatory environment, and it sort of pushes things into the county where things are more free form. And I think the county's also in a code review process, which is good timing. And then this topic of arrested development, this is a really thorny one, but it has so much potential here in Cortez around, you have all of these platted lots that have some kind of impediment around the infrastructure not having been completed. And so unlocking that land resource in a targeted, strategic, phased kind of way could be really powerful as one of the tools in your toolbox around addressing your housing needs. So in terms of our sort of big picture recommendations and next steps, because this problem is so complex and takes so many different types of expertise, I rarely see anything happen without strong partnerships. You need the neighbors, the business owners, the public sector, the private sector to be pretty aligned and at the table together, whether you're trying to preserve existing inventory, change the use of maybe buildings that are outside their useful life in some other form to housing, or build new. So that's, I recommend, and you also have some great agencies here already doing the work and kind of supporting their capacity and helping them do more would be amazing. Unlocking your land resources, being in the driver's seat with land, whether it's city-owned or other institutional owners like school district, hospital, that can really help be catalytic and help take risk out of development work, as well as have you guide, the outcomes that you want in terms of who's to be served. And then that, I'm sorry I have an acronym there, that's Request for Proposals, RFP. But your incomplete subdivisions also kind of are a land resource that could be unlocked. Preserving and reusing existing assets, we touched on a bit already. I do want to highlight mobile home parks within this because you have a pretty substantial mobile home inventory with a lot of homes that are nearing the end of their useful life. There may habitability and energy efficiency and all these things come into play. But we're seeing across Colorado, erosion of the mobile home inventory and it being really hard to do any kind of replacement housing that has that same price point that people can attain. So paying attention in terms of opportunities to preserve and stabilize and improve mobile home parks is important. And then all of this tends to take a fair amount of money. So I think, my hope is that with the policy work you're doing, the data of the needs assessment, you're positioning yourselves to attract money from outside the community. You may need to also look at your own resources in that regard to help catalyze, and I know you're already doing some work in that space around incentives for workforce housing, but I think bringing more players to the table through philanthropy, through employers, et cetera, in the funding space will serve you well. So, we're basically saying increase your supply across, we don't see anywhere, or increase your supply of housing across a full spectrum. At the lunch session today, we talked a little bit about step-down housing, about how for folks who would like to have less maintenance or a smaller home, there aren't a lot of options, and that can free up inventory of homes that work better for families and so forth. And we're very excited that you have the Pinion project in the pipeline going strong, and I think addressing that sort of missing middle is another key component going forward. So, and then I think that, having different housing, apartments, townhouses, et cetera, rounding out the diversity of your housing inventory a little bit would be another thing I would recommend. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I'd love to turn it over for you for questions, feedback, and discussion.
So we just recently had our council retreat last weekend, and one of the major concerns in our community is a lot of our aging infrastructure. So I know there's a lot of platted subdivisions that don't have roads or utilities to them. And I think that's the struggle we have as a city, we really can't take on more inventory when we're so behind in replacing a lot of the inventory we have now. And so I guess I don't know what we can do about that. I mean, we would need $300 million to replace everything we need to right now, and let alone build new streets and add that into our inventory. And I don't know if there's federal funding to tap into or how we get developers to do that. But then, of course, they'll push those costs to home buyers, which, isn't going to make those houses within the range that we need.
Totally. That is a very central and daunting problem I can appreciate. So I think that, one thing, and I also respect that, as the governing body for the community, you need to take care of what you already have, the commitments that you have. And so that's, a space where infill, maybe you prioritize infill development on undeveloped lots that are already within the city, not the sort of abandoned subdivisions first. And I do think that, there are occasionally windfall sources from federal funding or the state. There was recently this round of transformational housing grants that you could use for infrastructure. So keep, obviously being really aggressive about those when they come, but they don't tend to be a full silver bullet, unfortunately. Yeah.
I have a question about if the assessment included information specifically broken out about retirees that are living in the community but might not be working part-time or full-time jobs? And then I guess kind of an ancillary question would be kind of around migration trends, people that move here, people that move out, those sorts of things, or just how'd that work?
Yeah, so we did include, just general demographics on the age of people, and then we had some more anecdotal evidence from our property manager and realtor surveys about that there is a desire for people to retire to this community, but we did not measure that extensively.
I think you mentioned before, I would like to get kind of like a target range or number of what housing prices for sale and for rent would need to be to meet the need of that majority of our community. You said like under $800 a month for rent, and then what is that in terms of like buying a home?
Yeah, so I'll just back up to that slide. So if all of the gray section is basically showing where there's gap, sort of where there's less where the listings and inventory don't align with the need of how many folks you have in that cohort. So that, the gap is really, so it's up to 140% AMI or, and about a $300,000 home. And I apologize that the income of the household isn't on this particular slide. We can cross-reference, there's a table that cross-references that in the appendix of the report.
So on that slide, on the active listings under 245 that you found 5 at the time, 245 for a sale price would be, it looks like somewhere between 80 and 100% of AMI, affordable
Exactly.
for someone in that 80 to 100% zone of AMI.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So when you mentioned something that we could do is, really focus on making sure lots are ready to be developed and that there might be a lack of infrastructure, was there one or two things that really stood out? Was it, sewer lines, water lines, electric?
Yeah, they're actually, the woman within our team who reviewed the unfinished subdivisions had a recommendation of one to start with, which is contained within the report, and I don't remember the name of that one off the top of my head. But she thought in terms of sort of the scale and ownership structure and what was needed, that might be a tempting one. I also, though I'm very much sympathetic to take on, sites that are already well served with infrastructure and cut your teeth on those potentially before moving to a problem that's as thorny as that.
In terms of the cost going up, rapidly over the last few years, there was an article last year that I think Pitkin County was number one, where Aspen is, but then Montezuma County was the second highest price increase in housing. And compared to the rest of the state, we were pretty affordable, but now we've, jumped into where our peers are. And I guess what drove that, or what typically drives that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the data you referenced from the article resonates in terms of what we're seeing. I don't know that I've seen other communities have double-digit annual increases in their housing prices, but I don't know that I've seen anyone at 16%. That's a lot. And, I think that often it's sort of a truism in real estate that markets that are more affordable grow quickly because people start to recognize their value. And so if you're being compared to La Plata or something like that, they're like, oh my gosh, I could just be across the county line. And I also think that my observation is your job growth, your population growth have been strong, and your supply increase has not. So it's just that mismatch in the growth of inventory compared to the growth of population.
As part of this study, did you look into the pricing of both our fees and the other fees, like from the sanitation district and things like that, and how that affects the building?
We did, so, I think, sorry, I'm going back to the cost of construction. My memory is that your fees are pretty competitive compared to your peers. So we had, I guess we've rolled them in. But yeah, I think that was an area that is always worth looking at, and particularly, I know you need to make your enterprise whole, but it is one of those things within your control if you're able to backfill and support the types of housing that you want with fee waivers from time, or reduced fees or financing fees are all good tools in that space. We didn't have like a, screech the brakes, these are really high.
No, that's what I was asking, just as far as our rates, they are competitive for,
I think so,
for a
yeah.
place of our size. Thank you.
My question is kind of based around his question. There's no way government is going to fix this problem without partnering with the industry that builds these homes, because if government takes over, we'll screw it up. My question to you is, how is Cortez doing? If you were to rate us from 1 to 10 right now, and I'll put you on the spot, how are we doing?
Oh, I'm sorry, my rating meter is broken. But yes, I am in wholehearted agreement that everyone needs to bring their best expertise to the table. And, where I'm seeing successful, like City of Gunnison, I've been working on a project where the city bought 14 acres for a park and wetlands mitigation, and all of their public outreach was like, but housing. And so they ended up carving off 4 acres to do housing, and they did a request for proposals, partnered with a local builder who was able to bring his expertise. The city covered a lot of the initial architecture and engineering costs to reduce the carry costs for him, and then they worked out a deal that was very sort of being in lockstep together around him building community housing. In this case, it's deed restricted, 2 lots, and then he would get a lot for a market rate home. And that, sort of through that, everyone putting their best foot forward, we're housing 66 new people in townhouses and duplexes in Gunnison, and I'm really proud of that project.
And that was a great solution, but you still didn't answer my question.
Yeah, I don't have a way to rate you. What's the metric? What's the scale?
Are we on track, or do we need to overhaul the way we do things?
No, I think you're on track. I think that, I'm really excited that you're about to launch into this policy work, and I think there's a very thoughtful, well-informed team supporting that. So I give you a thumbs up on your direction.
Yeah, we realize there's a problem. It's just now we got to figure out a solution. And I wanted to know where we were at in our scale. Were we way, or can we get this done?
Yeah, I think, I think, I haven't seen any community solve this, but I have seen a lot of communities start to engage in productive solutions and start to make headway, and it feels like you're in that space too.
I think also to the extent that the Pinion Project sees kind of like boots on the ground, they see these families, they work with them in lots of different capacities, and recognize the need that, let's go ahead and move on this because this is a need in the community for families. I really respect that organization for kind of taking a lead on that particular project and kind of, addressing those needs. So in some ways, I think an organization like the Pinion Project has more of a pulse than we do as City Council on what some of those needs in the community are. So kudos to them for really seeing it and, trying to move forward with it.
Yeah, absolutely, and that, that is certainly a landmark project in terms of being challenging to put together, and really exciting that it's on its way.
I have another question regarding accessory dwelling units. Did you look at the potential for ADUs and what impact that might have in terms of addressing the housing issue?
Yes, and I'm sorry I don't remember the outcome. So that should be included in the land use recommendations chapter.
I just wanted to highlight one of the things that was in the recommendation section was flexibility, for flexibility around fees. I do think there are ways that we can not adjust the fees, but sometimes just adjust the timing of the fees that in ways that don't affect the city but would affect the developer. So I think that's something that we should definitely look at into the future, is looking at those kind of things of look at it through the eyes of a developer and say, okay, what are the hangups? Why aren't developers developing here? So providing some more flexibility there and actually listening to our developer community.
Yeah, I think that's a very powerful one, especially in a rising interest rate environment, right? If you can pay that fee when you get your certificate of occupancy instead of your permit, and you're not carrying it for those many, many months, it matters for sure. What else?
I just had a question about, one thing that struck me. So we have like 24% population that's like 18 or younger, but then it seems like the vast majority of our housing need is single, like 1-bedroom apartments. So and then the average like size of house was what, 2.4 people? So are like families bigger? Are they in more houses that they own, or are they not renting as much? Do you know how those numbers kind of play together?
How exactly those shake out? No, I'm sorry, I don't. But I do think that there's one of the things when I sort of talked about like address the full spectrum. Like just because you have sort of more 3 bedrooms than it appears you need. 3 bedrooms are actually very market desirable, and having move-in ready places that like professionals coming to the community can that are turnkey, you don't have to fix them up. That was something that employers identified, like we really need. So don't sort of say no to 3 bedrooms. It's just like lean towards the ones a little bit, 1s and 2s a little bit more is the nuanced way I'd try to like frame that recommendation. Like you're at a place where pretty much all housing is good, right?
I have a question that I don't know has an answer, but I see this as a twofold thing. The B part of it being the average income here. And I don't think you can have, well, I think one weighs on the other. So.
Absolutely, I agree.
I guess I'm just curious, like in your research, if there was any concern expressed around building higher density units in our community, and whether developers felt like that was profitable, or why there's kind of like an absence of those developments happening besides community organizations taking on that responsibility.
Yeah, so we definitely talked some about our observation that type of housing is needed, and developers having greater comfort in the single-family market because it's more tried and true here. So it's a little bit of like the history is informing the future around what people desire, and certainly the realtors also bore out most people's expectation is a single-family home in the community because that's what's here.
But it just seems very counter to the fact that we have, the 1-bedroom units almost 100% occupied.
Yeah.
Seems like
there
should be more interest in developing higher density units.
And you may actually, this study might help to shine a light on that to some extent. And we do sometimes see that after you've started to make this public, you may have developers making more inquiries as they're seeing that. I think it's also something you may need to cultivate. This is I might get run out of the room if I say this, but you may need to cultivate some talent from outside the community because we haven't been doing it very much here, you know? So getting some traction with developers who are experienced in a little bit larger markets doing that product.
I guess another question that I have in your research, I'm trying to figure out how to frame this question. What was like the turnaround of the units that were posted online, like rentals and homes for sale?
Yeah, so certainly, you know, property managers described like, oh, we don't even really keep like wait lists anymore because we just post something and we have multiple inquiries. So if something's ready, they can, you know, for rent, they can always fill it very quickly. In the for sale market, there may be sometimes some product that lags because it's overpriced or it really has severe renovation needs. But generally, the observation was that if it's sort of priced fairly and in pretty good shape, it's going to sell. Like, you know, I think we observed that the supply was like a month or something. Like, there's just not, you know, you usually think of like a supply needing to be sort of more than 6 months to be, or around 6 months to be in balance between buyers and sellers. It's very much a seller's market. Does that make, does that?
Yeah, and
address it?
that's priced fairly within the current conditions.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it's priced fairly according to a 16% annual increase in pricing, but not, you know, not wildly ambitious beyond that, I guess.
Did you look at any comparisons of like first-time home buyers? If that number has gone down or because of the market or?
Yeah, we did get some anecdotal evidence that it's harder for first-time home buyers with everyone sort of competing for such a finite product. But we didn't track if you're actually like losing ground on that.
First, my comment on first-time home buyers is like just personal experience through friends in the last few years who have been trying to buy their first home. They're usually bought up by realtors or management companies, you know, and so how do you fight that? Because they can come in and buy cash and then they can just rent them out, and it's not like they're competing with another family.
Totally. Yeah, it's a hard, I mean, so some communities do address that, trying to work in the space of deed restrictions, like you have to be a worker within our community to be eligible. That gets tricky because then you have to introduce oversight and so forth. Right. But that's probably the most common tool I'm aware of.
And then my other question is about, and is this all focused on stick-built houses? Because, you know, I know manufactured housing is getting nicer. Are they cheaper per square foot? You know, because we've got Southern Bluffs, which I don't know when that, in I think 2006 or something, that was platted, and I think that was intended to be, you know, it's manufactured housing zoned, but now it's filling in with these really nice, expensive homes and becoming a gated community. And I don't know if the residents realize that it is manufactured housing and that style of housing could go in there.
Yeah. So we are not making a judgment call on stick-built versus manufactured. Like, we're considering a roof over your head that's safe and habitable is a great thing. And I think it's actually really exciting that Colorado now has a couple of manufactured housing facilities. And so we've, you know, toured Fading West and IndieDwell, and I think that those do offer some good solutions here. And especially, I mean, I think they're trying. I'm not seeing that it's a foolproof, cheaper option because you obviously have like the transportation costs, and they're competing for the same, you know, resources. But some of the dynamics of building in a factory can help reduce those costs. And I think that those manufacturers are getting, you know, stronger with quality architecture and also how to do things, but instances where the boxes are knit together. You know, so yes. Please consider manufactured part of the solution here.
Great.
One of the recommendations to allow residential uses in all or most districts, while we don't have a lot of residential inventory, we do have commercial buildings that are underutilized. Is there anything that we could do to encourage that or to streamline the transition from commercial to residential for some of those?
Yeah, I think, I think definitely. And I'll actually pick on my home community of Gunnison again, because we've not succeeded here around having some vacant and underutilized motels, and had been approached by a couple developers saying, hey, could you allow these to be long-term rentals? Could we renovate them and repurpose them? And we're too wedded to our lodging tax and have said no to those use changes. And I'm, as a housing person, just like, oh, we're doing it wrong. But I think if you can get comfortable with, allowing the use, or maybe you already do, and then starting to, sometimes some outreach and engagement and matchmaking around if there's employers trying to, get something going for their employees, and there's an owner who's willing, there's a lot of deals to be made, I think.
So do those kind of projects usually, are you usually looking at them project to project because they're a little bit different? They're not, they're hard to fit into an existing code? Is that usually how that, process-wise, that works?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I haven't seen anyone do like a blanket sweep.
Okay.
Because it tends to, you sort of want to do one and test the market, learn from it, do the next one.
Okay.
Durango does have a big motel conversion going on with that Best Western. I don't know if you have tracked that one, but that's an interesting one too.
Cool. Thank you.
Anything else?
I think that's it. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely, thank you. And I will be continuing in an, did I get to next steps? Well, here's our contact information. And I'll be continuing in an advisory role on the policy, housing policy work a bit, so maybe I'll get to see you again.
Great. Thank you so much for your work on this. Really insightful. All right, we're going to move on our agenda. We're on B on our workshop, an update on the Colorado Department of Transportation. And I'm assuming this is South Broadway.
That's correct, Mayor.
Great. We do every meeting.
So that's got to be green for them to be able to pick up on your voice.
Okay, thank you. Are you gonna boot? We're gonna see who wins.
Go see who goes faster.
I
We're booting our computers
apologize. Yeah, doesn't enjoy this. While we're waiting, we can introduce ourselves. I can let Julie, if you'd like to start, because you're the boss.
Okay, so thanks for having us today. I'm Julie Constant. I'm the Region 5 Transportation Director with CDOT. And Jennifer?
And I'm Jennifer Allison, and I'm the Region 5 Traffic and Safety Program Engineer. And we were invited by city staff to come talk about some updates that we have, and I was going to use this as an opportunity to kind of also give an update of multiple projects that city staff and CDOT have been working on throughout.
It's still doing, please wait.
I'm so sorry.
While you're waiting for that to boot up, Rachel, if the public has any questions then about like this housing needs study, can we direct them to you? Okay, thank you.
There you go.
That was a yes. Okay.
Cool. We're very close.
Cute pictures of my kids you guys probably do not want to see.
So we're gonna talk about South Broadway, but first we thought we'd start with some bigger picture stuff just to help orient the conversation. Maybe we'll answer some of the bigger picture questions that you guys might have anyways through it. We're thinking we have about a 15-minute long presentation and then would have plenty of time that way for questions and discussion.
And at any time, you guys can tell me to stop, and I will stop. So as far as this goes, I'm going to touch on 3 types of project types and funding and how that's all related. I have the CDOT and local agency funded projects. Those are the smaller projects that we have to team up to get completed. The 10-year funded projects, which all of you are probably pretty aware, is a pretty arduous process to get on the plan and get funded. And then our asset funded projects. And those are the projects that are funded from our asset funds, and we track such as signals, surface treatment, and other things such as that. So the CDOT and local agency funded projects. First, to kind of give you an idea, at least specifically,
Got a step closer?
do I
Yeah.
have to, am I too?
Yeah, you're too far away
quiet?
from the mic.
I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
First, I have to kind of,
Yeah, there's one right
I
here.
need the short one. Okay, can I step back a little bit?
No, you can keep close.
First, I want to talk about the specific funding sources that I have that can help fund these smaller projects that I'm talking about, the CDOT and local agency projects that are funded together. That includes my maintenance level of service funding and my hotspots funding. And right there, sorry if this is too small, but kind of gives an overview of the funding I get every year. So these are really kind of the funding sources I can kind of pull from to help these smaller requests.
And Region 5, were you going to touch on that?
Yep, go ahead,
Okay,
you
go
can say
ahead.
that.
No.
So Region 5 has 3 transportation planning regions. We've got Region 8, 10, and 9. We have 15 counties, and then in those counties we have 55 towns and cities. And as you can see, I get about 3.6 million for MLOS, and that 3.6 serves to stripe our highways, so that's the long lines, that's the center line and the edge lines, that's all. And then it also goes to my ops crew to do signal maintenance, so that's just upgrading any signals that blow, fail, need immediate emergency help. And then sign maintenance, same thing, a sign gets hit, we need to replace it for reflectivity, that kind of maintenance. And then any MLOS operations and vehicles. For example, one of my ops team flipped a car, so our ops budget was a little high this year. So those numbers you're seeing right now are FY22 for the lower 4, and then FY23 was our striping for this year. So we get about 3.6 million. We're putting out over that, as you can see, for MLOS. Hotspots, that's kind of another fluctuating fund source that I can have. It is application-based, but it must meet 2 of the following things, which is safety, mobility, operations, and maintenance. Pretty flexible, and I can use it to backfill my MLOS budget, So I do a lot of work with the hotspots to try to put aside some money for helping out the local agencies with studies or looking at highway corridors.
So those dollars, to drive home the point with the slide, is a pretty small amount of money that we have to spread out across southwest and south central Colorado.
But we do still get a lot done.
We do. We do a lot of partnering with a lot of our local agencies and are able to capitalize and get a lot of things done, but yeah.
So then how can we make that work?
Yeah, because I was going to ask how that compares to the other regions, because just thinking about, like, our area is the most mountainous, I think, you know, having the San Juan Mountains, and so I would think that we would need a bigger budget than the other areas of Colorado.
So those budgets are really based upon population, vehicle miles traveled, and interstates play a lot into it as well. Region 5 doesn't have any interstates. We have 5% of the state's population, and we have about 10% of the state's lane miles. So unfortunately, we do get the smallest budget out of any of the 5 regions that we have within the state because of those parameters there. We do fight for every penny we can get, and we get as creative we can with every penny that we do get, but that is one of the challenges we're constantly up against.
Okay.
Good question, thank you. So how can we make this work? There's a couple of options here. We generally, and I know a lot of the city staff has heard this before, we direct city staff to grant opportunities. MMOF, Tony Katie is our planner, and Julie can probably speak to more of these grant opportunities, but our website also has these opportunities posted. These will help fund the smaller needs in each community. For these larger ones, we also encourage local agencies to get these projects on the 10-year plan. It is a process, it takes time, but that's probably another great path to get these larger projects recognized and built. And then there's always the smaller ones like I'm talking about here, where we can probably get together, continue to work together, and when funding becomes available, either on the local agency side or the CDOT side, we get it done. And so I'm going to move forward with some examples that has happened. One of my favorite, the city staff came up to me, I think it was, I'm going to butcher this, probably in 21, I don't know, Kevin, if you remember, or if you were here. But George came up to me about North Pinion and some issues with the traffic there and the sight distance. Come to figure out we were going to hit the signal just south of that to replace that. Then we also, my resident engineer came to me and said, hey, I think maybe we should look at signalizing North Pinion instead. So knowing that those were all interconnected, and we had already had a plan to try to look at that, I had some hotspot money that freed up from project savings, and I hired Stolfus, an engineer, to start studying this intersection for us and this flow. So the purpose of this was to kind of look at what can we do at these locations and how can we get traffic to flow within this area to make it safer and meet the city needs and CDOT needs. As far as progress at this point, there were tons of meetings, and I think there's another one on May 15th with the CDOT, Stolfus, and city staff to talk about path forward. But we're hoping to get a report and kind of recommendations from Stolfus on any kind of reorganization for this. Any questions? Okay. I'm really excited about this project, actually. The next one is the signage on 491 and 160. So city staff brought to CDOT's attention, and I think this was brought to our attention previously too, is the speeding on 491, right? And when we looked into the data closer, with data that was provided by the city staff and our own data, it was more of a compliance with the southbound truck traffic, because as you can see, you just can scream down 491 with nothing that stops you. I know that there was a pet accident at the RRFB near 3rd. So we looked at signage and options for signage along 491 to help that. So here's another caveat with this project. What we usually do for little projects like this is where a cost sharing comes in to play. And so I'll move on. Do you have any questions about this? So this scope, I guess I should move on a little bit more. So this scope kind of focused initially on the southbound lane, and then it grew into both ways and a little bit more signage. Not so it's PED flashing signs, no left turn signs at Third, and then radar feedback signs. And those are the signs that you can either put on existing speed limit signs, and that give you your speed feedback, or you can actually have separate units.
Go ahead and go to the next one first.
And I think that area is what's most concerning for our community, so I think that's why a lot of people are here and are going to want to watch this. So
Great.
thanks.
Okay. So this process, just to kind of bring it back to how the shared cost process works. So these signs are above and beyond what CDOT is required to put in for the MUCD. So again, for the cost share options, we like to have the local agency come to the table to pay for the installation and materials for those signs, any extra signs. The reason we do this is the MUTCD states it itself, but we try to reduce sign clutter. What we do find is that they're pretty effective when they start, but then they lose effectiveness as people keep going, right? I think this process helps also get buy-in from the local agency and the town to start the enforcement as well, right? A sign is just a sign unless there's enforcement. We've been successful with such projects, just not only getting these signs installed, but also having a timeline for peak time to enforce, right? So knowing this in your locals here, knowing when to enforce in these areas with this added signage. Is it tourist season? Is it year-round, right? Or is it, when it's inclement weather? Our team can work with CSP and can work with your locals to kind of get that game plan, but the first step is we gotta kind of share the cost to carry this load. When these signs are installed though, CDOT, we take on the maintenance for eternity. So it's an upfront cost, and then we maintain it for the life.
So when they wear out, the retroreflectivity dies, the radar quits working, we come back in and replace it at that point in time, assuming the community wants us to continue to have those signs there.
Yes, yeah. Any questions? Because I'm going to kind of skip around right now.
So of the shared cost sign examples that you have there, is the most expensive one clearly the radar enabled?
It can be, yes.
Okay.
That's a difficult one because we try to work with the local agencies to see if we can be flexible with install or material ordering, right? We just have CDOT, my ops team kind of oversee that because they're going to maintain it. These particular signs have to actually be programmed and put together with my ops team. So really, there's not a ton of leeway to kind of share that effort. Not impossible, but maybe. Yes?
You said earlier that your funding is based on population, is that correct?
That's correct.
I can't see how this would work well with Cortez because obviously we have a lower population, but we have an extremely high tourist, vacationer, and passers-by, plus an enormous amount of truck traffic. So I don't see how this can work, but it needs to. That's my bottom line. We need to fix it.
I agree with you. It's one of our biggest struggles because we do have a huge tourist population in this part of the state. If we actually looked at the tourist population numbers, we're probably one of the higher ones. It's the world I unfortunately have to work to live in. I don't actually have control over those formulas. I do provide input and feedback to the Transportation Commission and executive management anytime I can to change those formulas, but so far we haven't been successful.
Any more questions so far?
Don't give up.
Yeah, I will not. I'm here to fight for us.
I like it. Okay, so I'm going to skip over to speed limit setting because I think that's also another concern for 491-160, right, is the speed limit. This is going to get really convoluted because we're just changing up our process. So this is consistent. Doesn't change with our process, but federal level, by federal law, they say the local agencies that are in charge of their roads are by law held to setting speed limits. State law says that speed limit setting has to abide by a warrant study or a speed study. And then, of course, at our level, we are then held by the federal and state law to conduct speed studies before we even move a speed limit sign. So that's kind of how we're set up. The federal level gives guidance, and that guidance comes out of the MUTCD. And this is where things are going to change up a little bit. And this is where the exciting news comes in. So knowing that 491 and 160 is such an issue for Cortez, MUTCD will be coming out with a new book any day now. Yeah. The 23rd, I think, was the deadline. Mm-hmm. So that is actually looking at a more comprehensive speed limit setting and study. CDOT's ahead of the game because we now have started to do practice studies. So headquarters reached out to each region and said, do you have somebody or a local agency that will work with you and needs a corridor studied? And I said, I got them. So that's where I think George and I talked a lot about it, and I think Kevin came in a little bit later. And we did what they're calling a speed management study. So the difference mainly here, and again, I'm going to hit it high level, and you guys can reach out to me or Julie for any more detail on this. Again, this is brand new. We literally were in a training yesterday playing around with the 6-tab Excel sheet of data. So this one will look at the safety, geometry, and operation of the corridor. In addition, it won't just follow the MUTCD guidance, it will follow the NACTO, which is more of a pedestrian and local guidance, and then follow reports such as the NCHRP reports, which study a lot about speed limits and how to set them. Well, different reports, but I think there's 3 or 4 of them. Questions on this specifically, and I can go over mile part points and where we're at.
And let me add a little. So in the past, we would pretty much only look at the 85th percentile of the free flow traffic volume of what they are flowing, and we always tried to do it when it wasn't congested to get a feel of what traffic feels is comfortable to drive that section of highway, which 9 times out of 10 caused the speed limits to increase as opposed to decrease. Federal Highways has really been listening a lot because there's been a lot of concern about context, like what's going on the side of the road with accesses, businesses, the community feel, the corridor feel, the pedestrians, and all of that. And this updated guidance that Jennifer's talking about is really going to take that into account and into consideration. The NACTO and the NCHRP is really pushing for that context-sensitive side of it with the pedestrian inputs, the bicycles, access points, those types of things. Before, it was just cursory reviewed but not really given any weight. And this new process is going to allow us to put a lot more weight on it. So hopefully we'll have more success in potentially lowering some speed limits in a lot of our communities, because you're definitely not the first community we've talked to that's had concerns with our speed limits.
And so as far as this effort is and where we're at, George and I completed the application in September of 2023, and then now they're gathering, so that goes up to headquarters, and then headquarters does some cursory kind of gathering of data, and then they do field stuff. And so the field stuff is going to be this summer, and then they'll give us a report hopefully in fall. And that report, what happens is that we'll get a recommendation of changes, and then I will then meet with city staff and go over those changes. So the good thing I kind of fought back on with this, and George knows, generally with these, we have a signing of an MOU that basically says, City of Cortez, you're okay, and by law, as explained, if this shows we have to increase speeds, CDOT is going to do what we have to do by law, so we would increase the speeds. I told headquarters I'm not going to have City of Cortez sign that. So this is a draft. Okay. So the results of this we can just use for our benefit. And I mean your guys' benefit. So our hope is that we can get some understanding of a holistic view of what can we do in this corridor to help balance that pedestrian, truck, and speed. Questions?
I just have a question, in terms of geometry, because just the way that whole intersection is configured, it just, it just doesn't seem great. I mean, it's very confusing. It's tough to, when you're coming south to go east, and then when you're going north to stay north, a lot of trucks end up not realizing that they need to take a left to really go straight, and then they end up on our residential roads to get back onto 491 North. Is there any possibility that in the future that whole geometry could change?
That is a great segue into my next point.
But Robert, did you have a?
I did just have a question about where the not, I mean, I don't know that we're going to know mile markers, but where's the bottom and where's the top of the study area?
Thank you. And it's this, I wish, don't make me zoom because I don't get that. You're good. So I wish you might be able to see it. I don't know how clear that is, but it's mile marker 37.72, and I apologize, but it's near a pot shop.
Oh, chronic therapy.
Thank you. And then it goes to 27.2, which I believe encompasses, and the reason I set these is because there were 2 fatals and they were pedestrians. And it was almost those 2 locations that I wanted to include. They were weird, really odd, right? But I wanted to include it because of how odd it was. And I think it also includes one of the intersections that the city staff had brought to my attention that were further up north. Yes.
Lebanon, okay, yeah, because it's
so
just
I wanted
north
to
of
include
Empire.
all of that in this study. So that's the range.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Okay, so moving forward to these bigger projects, like intersection changes, what else? Oh, adding lanes south. So here are the 10-year funded projects, and forgive me, the planning process is so confusing. So I had to relate it to the planning documents that take place throughout the planning process. So we have first the regional transportation plan, which is a and please speak up if I'm saying something wrong, which is a 25-year plan, and that's usually put together by the TPRs. Yep. Then we have the statewide transportation plan. The RTP and the statewide transportation plan both kind of get updated around the same time, and they feed into the STIP, which is our 4-year plan that's funded. We've got years 1 through 4 that are funded. Every year, we go through that process of updating, doing the 4P planning process, and updating the STIP. And each year, we either update years 1 through 4 of what we can fund, and we add a year, right? So we always have on deck fully funded 4-year projects. I am not going any further into detail on that one.
And to add a little more detail, our regional transportation plans that are developed with the TPRs, so Cortez is part of the Southwest TPR, which is shared with La Plata County, Archuleta County, San Juan County, Dolores County. I think those are the main areas that are in it. It's not fiscally constrained, so in some ways it's kind of like this big giant wish list, which is a really great place to start. And then as you start going down the process and get into that STIP is where we start looking at the fiscally constrained side of it and how much money we really had. And each one of those regional transportation plans we usually rank and prioritize, and so it's usually those top ranked projects that get funded. We come back and revisit it every 4 years or so. We're getting really close to doing that, which Jen will hit on here in a second, but that's kind of how we go from the wish list, prioritize, and then get into how much money we really have to do what and what projects qualify for the different types of funding we have, and then we move forward with funding those.
So these 10-year projects, which for City of Cortez would be the intersection, and we also were brought up the 16491 or the 491 lane addition. City staff came to Southwest TPR, city staff contacted me, and we started talking about these options and these plans for this corridor. They are now, you can see in this graphic, currently those projects are waiting to be prioritized on the regional transportation plan. So they went through the 4P process, and that's kind of a process where any of these locals, commissioners, anybody can come to CDOT and we can start the discussion. Then we get it on the list and we wait for prioritization. Once that RTP is open again to prioritize, the SWIP opens as well, then those two documents feed into the STIP, and then that STIP process starts again with the financial 1 through 4 years. To go in a little bit of detail of the financial ability for STIP projects that go this path, we have RPP funding, which is Regional Priority Planning, and then we have TPR, or 10-year plan money, which is TPR. So those are two options for funding for such projects. As you can see from this, and Julie, you can tell me if I'm completely off base, I was pulling dates. So the RTP and the SWIP were just approved in 2045. The STIP is up for comment right now for the 24 to 27 plan. So where we're at right now with these addition projects for Cortez would be around 2050, pending anything else that changes, right?
Right. So CDOT are required through federal statutes to have these long-range plans. And so when we say, right now, we're kind of operating off of that 2045 long-range plan, that we don't necessarily have the money to build everything that's in that plan, but it's the wish list again. So in the next year or two, we will start the next process to create the 2050 plan, which takes things that weren't constructed on the 2045 plan, those stay, and then we add other stuff to it to continue to grow that list as other projects drop off the list. One thing we did do with our new executive director, that she's been with us for about 4 years now, is we did create this 10-year plan. And really the 10-year plan list takes our projects that are in our regional plans, and it prioritizes those regional plans, and then they said, you have X amount of dollars. What are you going to do with these X amount of dollars? What projects are you going to build off of your regional plans? And so that 10-year planning list that your team and your staff hears a lot about was us working with all the TPRs. So we had to take all 3 TPRs we engage with, combine their priorities, because we only got a certain amount of money for the whole region. And so we picked those top priority projects, spread that money around to start working on those. So right now, costs of construction are only going higher. The money we're getting out of special Senate Bill 260, Senate Bill 267, those types of things that are helping fund our 10-year plan projects. It's not going as far as we wanted it to go, but eventually we will get there and get all the 10-year plan projects built, and then the plan is over time, then we continue to fill that 10-year plan up with more projects as more dedicated sources of funding come in for these bigger capital projects.
And the 4P process and STIP update is a yearly thing, as I think Julie mentioned and I may have mentioned. So May through September, we start those planning efforts. Then in December, the planning efforts end. In January, we submit the regions submit the draft of STIP projects. Then February to April, it's out for public comment. And then in May, it goes to TC to adopt. If TC is okay with it, then it goes to FHWA in June. So that's our yearly kind of cycle. Starts in May, ends in June. There's 2 paths these bigger projects can go. So we've also got base funds and formula funds. Those are funds such as my funds that I look over, which is FASTER and HSIP. But those have to meet a benefit cost ratio. And that benefit cost ratio is based off of crash data. So I think this also relates back to that speed management study that I'm having headquarters do for this team to see if there's an option, because that same team would help me usher something like this through that lower level and that lower option. So I'm hoping that we have you guys on that list for the 2050, but maybe there's something that this study will come up with or that us as a team can figure out we can do in the meantime. So that then, again, as you move forward, you get safety funding for it if it meets the benefit cost ratio. And then from the safety, we do STIP it. It's a very quick process when it goes that route. And then we go into funding and construction. I will say though, my faster, I think, oh, I do have it here. My faster spent for until 2030. As Julie mentioned, our projects are getting more and more expensive, so we're throwing more and more money to get less and less done. I'm sure you guys don't have that problem, right? I'm just kidding.
We know we're all in it together.
Any questions about that?
Here we go.
Oh, no.
I'm the guy you don't want to hear from. The reason you're here is because we have speeders on Broadway, and it's way too fast. We have businesses. What we're hearing from you is, you get what you get, don't have a fit. In the meantime, we have citizens that are in danger. And I speak personally because my wife has already been hit twice on Broadway. I've lived here all my life. It's an issue. We don't have 10 years. We want to be on the priority list, please. I know they say, oh, we're not going to look at it till fall. You know, this is an emergency for us. This has been going on for years and years and years, and they say, we'll look at it next year, we'll look at it next year. And they say, oh, you don't have a problem down in Cortez. I think somebody in Denver has decided that. We have an issue, and that issue is Broadway. The problem is the speed is too fast.
Thank you.
Understood. And we're working within the tools that we have to work with. I understand your concerns, and I understand that
I
been
know that
personally
you know what
impacted.
I'm talking about.
I do. I do.
But if you have any power, we're asking for your help.
I hear you. I do. Did you have any more slides after that?
I was going to go into asset-funded projects, which are not, if we want to stay here, that's kind of was where I was going to end if we were out of time, and we're willing to stop here. These are funded projects that go for our signals, stuff you guys probably already know. I can run through them unless you guys want to start a discussion now.
Well, I guess just in general, you know, these shared cost signs, I'm thinking about like kind of the short term. Do you have an idea of something like a radar sensitive sign? And would that be, is it like a 50-50 split between the municipality and CDOT, or how does it work?
So, good questions. I can go back to first the process. So what happens with these shared cost signs is the local agency comes to CDOT with an issue, right? We had city staff coming to us that there was a speeding issue for southbound traffic. So then my team works with the city to figure out a problem. The problem, and excuse me if I butcher this, I'll go to this slide. So initially the team suggested a speed radar sign kind of where the higher end is, so past that intersection that you guys were talking about, so north on 491. Then a advanced warning PED sign, so an additional PED sign for that RRFB located at 3rd. And that would really address that southbound and kind of, again, provide that flashing sign. Again, like I said, we could work with CSP locals, and if we deploy this and have enforcement, it's very effective. But it does kind of lessen the effectiveness out over time. So there might need to be a scheduled enforcement, right, based on maybe some busy seasons or what have you. So that signage effort increased to then not only addressing southbound, but then northbound. So we would have flipped it and done the same thing on the opposite side of that RRFB. So a speed radar sign and then a PED warning sign. And then I think we also looked at ramping up and increasing signage for the side roads on 3rd and where that car wash was going to be, Canyon. And then no U-turns and no left turns. So we have a whole gamut. So then that process, what happens once we figure out what we want, and more so what you guys want, then the city of Cortez says, these are the signs we want. This is where we, as CDOT and city, agree to put them. My staff will go out, install them, and then we will bill the city of Cortez for the installation and materials. And then we sign an MOU before we install, saying that CDOT is now on the hook to maintain those for the long term, and the city will pay for upfront installation costs. So that's the cost share. And these are only for kind of, I think what you'd mentioned, the signs above and beyond MUTCD required.
I have a question, like, it's kind of in line with this. So at Canyon Drive, someone was proposing a business there, and then that was going to increase traffic, and they, I guess, went to you, and they were going to have to take on the entire cost to improve that section. Is that common? Because I feel like that kind of hinders small communities from growing and filling in when developers have to suddenly cover the entire cost of like redoing a section of, the road. And I don't know.
Yeah, so I think you're probably talking about I believe it was a car wash.
Yeah.
Yeah, my staff handles that, and that's an access permit that they have to get through. And an access code does require that any changes to the highway are on the developer. I have worked on the consulting side before, and I've always thought, wouldn't it be great if we could have like a shared cost situation when we know development's coming? Unfortunately, that's not CDOT's purview, right? We can enforce it. What the city does to help is really your business. But so details on that one, we did give a range of ideas to this developer to kind of cut costs. We always have that in mind because we understand development helps your communities. So I think our was it the eyebrow they called it? Our final was just kind of this string median that would then kind of block the through traffic from 3rd and Canyon. And that then eliminated some of the conflict movements and actually would make that RRFB a little safer because, again, it eliminates more ped and vehicle conflicts as well. I don't know the status of that. I'm assuming they walked because I don't think Randy has given me the update on that one.
Yeah, I think it fell through.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have a really specific question that you might not be able to answer. But can you give us an idea of what signs cost?
Yeah, I can answer that. If you want to know the full cost of this full gamut of signs that you're seeing here, that was about $31K. Thank you. 31 to 131.5. Okay, and again, with those signs, those speed radar signs being the most expensive, but I will say they're probably the most, they do the most for us for slowing people down, especially if we have enforcement. I think they are about 15.
Okay, so we're estimating the speed radar sign probably was about half of that, or close to half of that 30,000?
And that would require, we're putting up 4 of those, only 2 of the speed radar signs. It would be 4 ped warning signs, and then 1 no left turn sign was the full scope. I did want to note, and I don't know, George, if you know this, but we're having Stolfus get counts at 160 and 3rd, just in counts talking about like turning movements and everything. Again, we can look at if it even comes close to a signal warrant. Whenever we find these issues, we always kind of go through the gamut of let's collect this data, and let's see, where are we? So that's kind of just something we're going to put on our consultant to do as well. That's helping us with the other intersections.
I had a question of kind of the interaction of the two projects, the signage and the study. If the signage, well, one, I guess it'll depend on the timeline of signage if we agree to do it, but would that create an issue of you're doing a study in your sort of honeymoon phase of where all your signage is effective and then you're back to your baseline
Thank
3
you.
months later?
And this is a hard message to deliver, right? I know we want to fix this now, and I get it, and I want to fix it for you now. But this is what I'm concerned with, is if we don't leave it as is for this study, we might impact the true story of what we're seeing here. I would, of course, if this stuff went in, if the city decided to do this, it wouldn't be a complete killer. I would let the staff know, headquarters know these were implemented, when they were implemented. But I am pushing headquarters to get out here as soon as possible so that we can gather that data and move forward with something.
So I guess the second part of that is, do you have an estimate or an idea of when that data gathering phase could conclude?
They said summer, and the last I heard was possibly in June.
Okay. And that answers the other part I was going to ask about, was the seasonality. I mean, it's much more effective for them to look at it in June, July, August than it would be for them to look at it in October.
And I think with the speed management plan, what their hope is, or our hope is to spend more time in the field gathering data at different times to get a good holistic picture, because that might be great for the speeds on 491, but not great for the PED use at RRFB, right? Because you might see more PED use during the school days, right? So again, with that application that George and I filled out together, we did put those little things in there saying, here's the location of the schools, here's who we think uses this. So in for this draft, obviously they're learning, headquarters is learning, but that's our idea.
Well, and one of the biggest issues now is pedestrian use is depressed because it's unsafe. So
Yeah.
like people look at it and say, I don't want to be a pedestrian there, I would rather be a vehicle there.
I completely understand that.
I know we're running out of time very rapidly, but I just want to say one last thing. The person who was killed on South Broadway, Elijah Can't See, was a former student of mine. And so when we start to talk about numbers in terms of the cost of signs and things like that, that's kind of where my mind goes in terms of weighing, public safety. And here's a kiddo who, in my opinion, had a lot of potential and was massively loved by his family, and now he's no longer with us. So, for what it's worth, when it's kind of a personalized situation like that, it kind of hits you hard.
Yeah, it does. It does. That's probably the hardest part of Jen's and my job, because we all know any fatal we have on any one of our roadways was somebody's loved one, and yeah, we do understand that.
All right, any more questions from council? All right, thank you so much for coming in and updating us on that. This has been a topic of discussion since a kid was hit recently, and it's just been unsafe in the development that's happening there. So we look forward to hearing how the study goes and a report from you soon. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to council general discussion. Do any council members have a topic they'd like to bring up or share with council or discuss?
I just wanted to share with council and the public that the League of Women Voters is holding an event on Thursday at the library about running for school board, School Boarding 101. It's what you need to know about running and serving on a public school board in Cortez from 6:30 to 8 p.m. Thursday.
Great. Thank you, Letty. Okay, well then we'll adjourn our work session and we'll start our regular meeting at 7:30.